Hello, Anna. Thank you for being with me today. So nice of you to join me to this discussion on how to use digital media and podcast as a tool to create change. Could you tell us who you are and how you got involved with the Green Student Movement in Denmark?
Yeah, my name is Anna and I'm 23 years old. I moved to Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, a few years ago to begin my studies at university. And decided to get involved in a movement acting on climate change. So I joined a movement called the Green Students Movement in Denmark. And when I arrived there, I didn't really know what to do in the movement because I didn't know how to organize demonstrations. I didn't know how to have meetings with politicians and all this. We wanted to motivate people in the movement and make our voices heard by each other. The pandemic arrived, the corona pandemic. We could not be in the same rooms anymore, and all we had was these Zoom meetings, and we felt very far apart from each other. We recorded everybody's voice and cut it together to make people feel that we were close connected, even though we were apart. Another thing we wanted to do was also to explain a lot of things to young people in Denmark about the climate crisis and about the political situation also. The climate crisis becomes a very technical obstacle, and politicians talk about, oh, we need to reduce these tons of carbon and we have to, make these technologies work. And for a lot of people, it becomes very difficult to understand what's actually going on, what's bullshit, what's not. So we wanted also to make like our own channel for that, because we didn't feel like anybody did that. Often in political discussions, people are so far apart from each other. And even though we have to reach the same goal, and it's like that, for example, with the climate, but still we have these great walls between us, I guess. We wanted to break them down. I borrowed a Zoom recorder, a little like handheld recorder from one of my neighbors. And I started just recording things around me in the summer a few years ago. And then I decided that we could make a podcast in the Green Student Movement, because I felt like that could be a great communication tool for us. We just began recording. Actually, none of us knew how to make a podcast in the beginning. We downloaded a program on the computer where we could, cut all the recordings and mix them up and put some music in it. And we got some microphones so we could make a speak over it. And we made a jingle in the beginning of the podcast and all that. So it was like a real podcast from the beginning. And one of our friends, he knew how to mix, so it sounded professional and all. And then we just began, making podcasts about whatever we want. We don't have to ask anyone what to do. I mean, we're just a lot of young people. We have a lot of energy to put into these things. So people often act quite fast. And from the day I got the idea, making the podcast, into the day we had the first episode out, I think that was like 3 weeks or something. And then we just rolled with it and experimented a lot also, because the podcast media is quite nice, because you can do what you want. You can make interviews, of course, but you can also just talk. We had some people reciting poems, for example, like as a final thing in a lot of the podcasts to make the ending nice. And we had a lot of music, and we went out to some of the demonstrations and recorded all the shouts from the demonstrations and put them in as breakers. And it's also like a creative space where you can just have a lot of fun doing it.
I'm just gonna go back to what you said earlier. So you felt like, as young people, that you were caught in this very black and white world and nobody was going forward with anything constructive. So you wanted to get all the different perspectives on what can we do as single persons, but also as a group of young people, and this becomes bigger and bigger, and it becomes a movement, which is your Green Student Movement. And also you said you need to just embrace the media of the podcast, which is like a creative space. You can do what you want with it, be creative and try and see if it works. This could be fun, and I'll record somebody saying something about this, or I have a good idea of what I want to say. And that shows that if you do sit down and take the time to do it, you can actually quite fast make something that is your own product.
Yeah, and it's not that difficult. I mean, none of us had any experience with making podcasts, as I said. It's just sound, and you can put on effects on voices, and you can make a lot of funny things. with the sound quite simple in these programs on the computer, right? It was quite easy to have an idea about something and then just do it and end up having this product. Yeah, as you said, you made something that you can, send to people around you that you know. For example, the climate strike last week. Listen to this. Or we made something about our feelings about the climate crisis and how we use our feelings as activists, for example, in another episode. We could kind of push this out, and when people asked us about, what are you doing in this moment and how can I be involved in it, we just said, listen to this podcast we made, because it explains everything in a way, right?
How much of an effort is it to, get people connected with your podcast?
It depends who you want to reach. We got a lot of young people inside the climate movement to listen to it. That was also our first goal, because we wanted to make something everybody was proud of. We're scattered all around the country, and it's so nice to feel that you are part of a bigger movement. And you do that when you listen to a podcast somebody in your movement made, right? Most young people of Denmark and the rest of the world, I guess, are quite concerned about the climate crisis. And our experience is that people often feel quite alone with that concern, even though everybody's concerned, because it's not something we really talk about. And if you ask people from the older generations, it's just like, oh, but we'll figure it out, don't worry. But we have to make some spaces for talking about these things. And we wanted to do that also with young people outside of the climate movement, who's not a part of an organization or a community in any way related to this. When we're out in schools and universities, talking about what we're doing and talking about the political situation and talking about why it's important to act and why it's important to do something and why it matters that you do something. And when we do all this and talk about and present our movement, we often bring the podcast with us. We use our social media a lot. Every time a new episode comes out, we make like a small kind of video, just a simple thing with some graphics and some text from the podcast. We cut out 20 seconds or something from the podcast episode and then put it up on Instagram and on Facebook and Twitter and all this, so people know there's a new episode out. And then we get people to follow us on the the podcast applications also, because then they will automatically see when we release a new episode.
Yeah.
Du lytter til Den Grønne Frekvens, en podcast lavet af Den Grønne Studenterbevægelse. Vi er et landsdækkende fællesskab for unge, der kæmper for et grønt og retfærdigt samfund. Og vi kræver klimahandling nu. Lyt med, hvis du er interesseret i klimaaktivisme og kampen for en bæredygtig fremtid.
Hej, det er Anna her. Velkommen til Den Grønne Frekvens. Jeg sidder helt alene på mit værelse på et kollegie i København. Og den her episode bliver lidt et eksperiment, tror jeg.
We kind of decided, okay, we have to have a place where we can, make a little studio. So it's not just, me underneath all my pillows trying to make a quality sound here in my room, but something in more like a little bit more professional. And we also we started recording with more professional recorders and microphones also to make the sound quality go up a little bit. It's not something we have used a lot of money on in the moment.
Social media, digital media side of the movement. What's the next step for you?
Right now we don't make any new episodes for the podcast, but another group from the movement has taken over and they're trying to figure out what they want to do, but they're gonna mix it all up again, I think, and do things in a new way, because that's what we do. A thing I'm working with at the moment is when we organize demonstrations, for example, when we go on the streets, and in the climate strikes, for example, or in the marches, we want to make a soundscape for that. So I use the podcast skill that I made, or that I got from making the podcast, to make these soundscapes where you can, for example, put in sounds of fire and thunder and these, alarming sounds, and mix that with people saying it's an emergency, for example, from the movement, and can we put an echo on a politician's voice? It sounds like, oh, they're just talking and talking and talking. You can so easily make effects like that. And the sensation when you make a soundscape like this with all these things mixed up, like creeps. So, and then we put it on huge speakers outside in the demonstrations and drive them around on bicycles, these speakers. And you know,
and it creates a lot of attention. We do it outside the parliament building. Yes. What's the reaction to this? Normal people go about there, but also the politicians themselves and our elected officials go there. What's the reactions you get?
It's very different. Some of the politicians, they stop up and listen and know what's going on. They get kind of interested in it, I guess. Others, they just walk by trying to ignore us as much as they can, but that's quite difficult because we're often hundreds of people, thousands of people out there shouting, and we have drums and everything. It's completely non-violent, of course. We're just like standing there and also talking with the politicians coming by. And the mix with this, the soundscape and the visuals we're doing and a lot of people, it creates a lot of attention.
We're privileged here in Denmark because we can go outside the parliament building and just keep shouting at them and say, hey, you're not paying attention to this problem and you're not going to get, kicked away. The problem is that in terms of this project and Bolivia right here, is that the people we work with, they live far away from any parliament building. Your movement is a good example of, what can you do without actually being elected to power, just with that context in mind, that these people are far away and they're young and they are also very concerned about the climate and they can feel the climate change happen to them regularly. So what would your advice be for these people?
Using medias in different ways is a really good idea in general, because maybe the Bolivian parliament is not paying attention and not looking in that direction and they're quite far away from that. But the global world is looking a lot. It's my experience, at least, and we have, for example, experienced contacting climate activists globally all over the world, and because we know we have a privilege to take up space and take the word, and also take the word right outside of our parliament and talk with our politicians. That's quite special. We can do it right here. Maybe they don't always listen to us, but at least we have the chance to talk to them. And we bring like messages from all over the world, right? Because we know we have this privilege. And I think it can feel almost impossible to change anything when you're so far away from what's happening. And even we can feel like that, quite hopeless in this situation, because it feels like we have no power in this. But, making connections in a global community it feels like then, okay, we're not alone with this. And a lot of people out there trying to help us and have similar problems. I think using the platforms that we have, the global platforms that we have, with, for example, making podcasts and distributing information and all this, can change a lot of things.
Anna, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about this, about our project in Bolivia and about your student movement here in Denmark. Very interesting to hear how you use digital media and podcasts to change and keep our politicians on their toes. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.